We advise the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Kunanan. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight's topic is geopolitics. You know, folks, in the last several weeks, tensions have been rising in the South China Sea as the Philippines and the People's Republic of China have been locked in a diplomatic and naval standoff over Scarborough or Panatag Shoal. Now, this issue is of national and regional geopolitical importance. So in this show tonight, we're going to have a frank discussion to enlighten all of you about the issues and the situation. And joining us now is a excellent resource person. In fact, we're very lucky to have him. He is a former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and possibly one of the smartest men to occupy the office. He is a brilliant tactician, analyst, and commander. And he is also a master's degree holder in mass communications from the University of Philippines, public administration from De La Salle University, an air transport course from the Asian Institute of Management, and PhD studies in advanced management techniques also. He is also the chairman of the board of several companies in the Philippines. It's my pleasure to welcome to Philippines Uncut, General Benjamin Defensor.
Thank you. Good evening sa mga televiewers natin. I am also lucky this evening because I'm a former general, I'm a former chief of staff of the armed forces, and I will be interviewed by the son of a general who is himself a distinguished general in our armed forces.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, sir, in my introduction to you, I mentioned your credentials, and really, sir, stellar credentials. And aside from that, I failed to mention that you are chairman of the Apex Counterterrorism Task Force. And I will hold up something that we brought to the studio. And this is a very, very vital and important office in APEC. Can you tell us about this position, sir?
I was chairman of the APEC Counterterrorism Task Force representing the Philippines because I was made an ambassador and sent to that body consisting of 21 countries for representing the Asia-Pacific region, the region that has the biggest trade in terms of revenues in the whole world. And I was sent there because the president believed that I could do a good job. So actually it was my first foray in the foreign service, having come from the military service, and they said it could be related to your job because it's counterterrorism. And I said maybe I'll make a go for it because after all I have a lot of experience in counterterrorism. Somebody once said that you'll be very good in counterterrorism because, among other things, you've been married to one for many years. So you are experienced in domestic terrorism, so you might as well go into international terrorism. But it was not an easy job because, you know, when you go to an international fora and you are a newcomer like the team that I had with me, it was difficult to get what they said, a consensus, because in a fora like APEC, nothing is binding. But to get an initiative pushed through, you have to have a consensus. And a consensus in an international conference like the APEC means a unanimous decision by all the members. So if one disagrees, there is no consensus. So you can just imagine how difficult it was for us to get a consensus on an initiative. So they told me, you get an initiative pushed through, that is a remarkable achievement. You get 2 initiatives pushed through, that is a miracle. But we did not get 2, we did not get 3, we did not get 5. We got 24 initiatives pushed through. So I said, siguro yung big boss na sa taas yung tumirada noon kasi baguhan kami, and we were able to get that number of initiatives. And they were so impressed that they named the Philippines under my chairmanship as the best performer of APEC, something that up to now we still can't believe how it happened. But sometimes there are things in this world that you cannot easily explain. And based on that experience, I was able to use a lot of that exchanges with the United States, China, South Korea, Japan, the other countries in the Asia-Pacific region, to the other engagements that I had in conferences all over the world.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And this involvement with APEC has given you a macro, and as well as your stint as Armed Forces Chief and your
Yes.
long career in the Philippine Air Force, has given you really a grasp, a macro political grasp of the issue surrounding our topic tonight, which
Yes.
is the Spratlys and AFP modernization.
that is where I found out that when you are in foreign affairs, when you are dealing in international affairs, the best person to deal with insecurity should be a combination of many things. One, he should have operational experience, which they call another dimension in foreign affairs. Two, you should have the right academic, which means historical, cultural, and strategic direction of the country that you're dealing with. And third, you should have the diplomatic skills to deal with people from countries who have a different culture and a different way of thinking from you. Because in international conferences, the only thing that makes people agree most of the time is the food in the restaurant. Pag masarap, talagang lahat kayo mag-agree na masarap. Pero pag
dun lang po.
nagpasok ka ng initiative dyan, eh, ang daming marurunong eh. So we had to use a lot of techniques. One was you have to plead,
Yes.
you have to cajole the representatives to support your initiative. And if it does not work, since I was a general, I threatened them. I threatened them, and I said, if you do not agree to what I am proposing to you in our committee, you will have to sing with me in the stage this evening. And alam mo naman, mga Pilipino lang yung malakas sa microphone. So it worked most of the time. It's what I called the karaoke diplomacy in foreign affairs. And oftentimes it worked. They would rather agree to the consensus that I was asking from them than to go on stage and sing with us. Pero sa Filipino, no sweat yan eh. Piece of cake yung kanta-kantahan eh.
Yes, sir.
And so I said I was successful because of the karaoke diplomacy that we employed.
Anyway, sir, diplomacy is part of our discussion tonight, but let's talk about the Spratlys po. Let's talk about the history of the Spratlys and the Spratlys conflict and the controversy surrounding this disputed island.
Yeah, there are many historical points of view of the Spratlys based perhaps on the perspective of the Philippines, then China, Vietnam, Malaysia, the other countries. They all have their stories about Spratlys. In the Philippines, we have our own share of stories, including the story of how Coloma discovered the islands. But what I know from my experience in the Air Force was that the first runway there on Pag-asa was built by one Air Force commanding general, General Rancudo, and that is why it is called the Rancudo Airstrip, because he built it there and started the first solid development on aerospace in the Spratly Islands, on Pag-asa Island.
Filipino was,
Yes.
the first airstrip was on Pag-asa Island.
Kaya
and
naiinggit
developed by
yung mga
Filipino.
kapitbahay natin doon dahil tayo lang yung may airstrip na nakakalanding ang C-130. But you have to be very careful when you land on the C-130 kasi maiksi.
Yes, sir.
So it's either you make it immediately or you go into the water. But the Spratlys is a beautiful place. Pwedeng mag-compete sa Boracay yun eh. Magaganda yung sand niya. It's like an islet in the middle of nowhere. And if you want to forget your cares, you stay there.
World-class diving as
Yes.
well.
And then there is something about the Spratlys that I remember na ang tubig niya masarap eh. It's very clear and it's sweet. You're expecting salty water when you drink in.
Yes, yes.
Maybe it's because of the corals
Yes,
and the
yeah.
way they are
Yes, sir.
filtering the water that goes to the water that you will drink. But it is, like I said, a nice place, and because of its strategic importance, it is something that the Philippines will not let go, and that is probably the reason why so many countries are claiming the Spratlys right now.
Let's talk about that, sir. The huge interest in the Spratlys, because aside from being, okay, number one, it's a vital sea lane, one of the most, the South China Sea is one of the busiest sea lanes in the world, but they keep talking about the resources. You talked about the tourism resources, but there's also a lot of purported resources that lie under
Yes.
the sea.
As a matter of fact, it was quoted in the papers by a general in Southern Command, and he said there are about $23 trillion of natural gas deposits. So he said the Philippines is like a blind beggar sitting on a mountain of gold. And that officer, who is now a general, was one of the officers who was with me when we prepared the modernization program. He's looking at me right now, and I'm sure he is smiling because he was one of those that I recruited to help me formulate a modernization program for the AFP. I chose the best minds that I could get my hands on. I got the top-notchers of each class. I got the outstanding officers in each class, because I know what we were going to do was something that will be realized 10, 20, or maybe even 50 years from now, and you cannot afford to make a mistake. And as a matter of fact, some of them who are very good rose to where they are. One of them is General Oban. He became chief of staff like me. Another is General Rabena, who became a commanding general of the Air Force like me. And there are others coming up who work with me, who I'm sure will become commanding generals also, and I cannot mention their names right now, but they will definitely become commanding generals too. One of the things that I emphasized to them was, as much as possible, you play chess, because chess is strategy. Chess keeps your mind thinking, and many of them have the strength of a master when they play chess.
Yes, sir. Yes,
because
sir.
countries like Singapore, countries like China, they encourage their officers to play this game, because military strategy is no different from chess strategy.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And this game of chess is what we're seeing now
Yes,
in the South China
it's
Sea.
a game of chess. It's
both,
a gambit. It's a
both diplomatically and also
you do
militarily.
not go in this game, and I'm sure there are many chess players over there, including Eugene Torre, my friend, the first Asian grandmaster, who led the surge, and now the army of Chinese grandmasters are all over him, beating him, because they are fast in getting technology. And I'm saying this because you have to have different approaches here, because it depends. You do not play the board; you play the man.
Yes.
Or you play the board and the man.
Exactly,
And you don't. If you don't have in chess, it teaches you that if you don't have a victory, play for a draw.
Yes.
It's better to have 1 point than to have a 0.
And then that ties up really with what's happening now. Let's talk about the conflict, the tension now in South China Sea. As we know that a few weeks ago, the Philippine Navy or Coast Guard stumbled upon, or Philippine Navy stumbled upon some Chinese fishermen who were doing some illegal fishing and poaching of rare clams and turtles and that sort of stuff in Scarborough Shoal. And so when they were about to arrest the Chinese fishermen, the Chinese vessels, not military yet, but maritime surveillance vessels, came between the Philippine Navy ships and the fishermen. And so then standoff happened, and we set a warship, the newest naval ship, BRP Gregorio del Pilar, which we eventually pulled out. And as of today, I read in newspapers that NOLCOM, Northern Luzon Command, has reported that there are now 14 Chinese vessels in Scarborough Shoal.
Yes.
Dumami pa po, sir. It has in fact increased.
Sinisindak lang tayo ng mga yan. Because,
how do you see this whole thing playing out, sir?
Yes. Well, first of all, the Philippines indirectly is saying, this is our territory. So, alis muna kayo dyan. And maybe we should have sent our Coast Guard vessels immediately, because this is a territorial issue.
Coast
and
Guard, not Navy.
Not the Navy.
Ano po yung difference? What's the difference po between the two?
Well, the Navy is normally the ones that you use in areas far from what we call the territorial waters, the 12-mile and the 24-mile distance from the shoreline. But when you talk of the exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles, you usually use the Navy because it's too far off. And besides, the Navy belongs to the armed forces. And in the concept of command and control, and when you need assistance from, say, multi-role fighters or from other surface attack aircraft, it is the Navy who will call the shots. Yes,
sir. 2 points. Number one, you mentioned 200-mile exclusive economic zone as defined by United Nations UNCLOS.
Yes.
Law on the
Law of the
United Nations
Law of the Sea.
Law of the Sea, yes. And so clearly, Scarborough Shoal falls within our EEZ and not China's.
Yes.
Clearly.
Under the UNCLOS, it's very clear that it should be ours. But China
UN
is
Convention of the Law of the Sea.
But China is refusing to accept this because they said they have a historical evidence to show that it is theirs. The 9-point line that the U-shaped line that goes all the way to southern China, and they said it goes into that line. So we were correct in bringing the case to ITCLOS because among other things that we are supposed to do, we cannot just rely on one course of action. There is no silver bullet for this kind of issue. You have to have different courses of action, and one of them is to go to the International Tribunal for the Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is in Germany, and make your protest there. So whether China goes there or not, that's their That's their concern. The other is to, like what some people have been suggesting, engage the ASEAN, because ASEAN is one of the trump cards of the Philippines in international relations, because we have common interests with ASEAN, and to engage them economically and maybe to a certain extent in military exchanges, so that we'll have some kind of common perspective, because they also have, some of them have claims, some of them have claims there.
Yes, sir.
And of course, we have to engage China. We have to engage China because China is not our enemy. China is one of the countries that we deal with. China is one of the countries that is maybe what I would say right now, which some people would say is now part of the Philippines, because we are now, our Taipans are building shopping malls in Fujian province. You barely find a Filipino Chinese right now who has no relative in Xiamen, in Fujian, because all of the Chinese there came from China.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But interesting point, sir, that you said that we should engage our regional partners. But let's talk about the Philippines' response to this crisis. And you mentioned the sending of the Navy, and the Coast Guard should have been sent and not the Navy, because as you correctly pointed out, when you send the Navy, it sends a different signal.
Yes.
It's a military response, yes, as opposed to the Coast Guard.
Parang nangahamon ka na nun eh. Pag yes, Navy, parang hinahamon mo na. So, but if it's a Coast Guard, parang sinisita mo lang. It's like somebody who went into your backyard and your Coast Guard says, pare, amin ito, huwag ka pumapasok rito. Pag Navy ang pinadala mo rito, eh, may baril na yan eh. Pinaputukan mo na kaagad yun. May threat ka ng paputukan mo, something like that. And it was correct to pull out the Navy. Because maybe at that time, I have to be kind to my friends in the Navy. Maybe at that time they were the first ones who can go there immediately. They had the resources. They had the resources.
Yes, yes.
Because our Coast Guard is not also as modernized as the Navy.
And our Navy has been the recipient of this new Hamilton class
yes,
Coast Guard ship.
Kaya tinestingan siguro baka hindi umabot or whatever. Because you know we have been receiving a foreign military sales aircraft. Yes. We have been getting aircraft, and I was commanding general of the Air Force on the military assistance program, and not all of this equipment are good equipment. Nobody gives good equipment away and for free, you know.
For example, the BRP Gregorio del Pilar is a decommissioned
yes,
1950s era Coast Guard, former U.S. Coast Guard cutter, which was given to us, I think, last year. Now, what was the effect of sending the Navy there? I mean, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of the response of China, what was the effect of this?
Well, when you talk of the Navy, it is a military representation, which is not normally the case immediately when there are issues involving territory.
Yeah. And China's ship there, was it a naval ship? It was a maritime surveillance
And maybe the
craft.
good thing about that is that the Philippines was sending a message, you know, we mean business. That's why we're sending our Navy, because we have to make sure that whether from where you really are or what you really are. You might be pirates, you might be smugglers or whatever. And then when they boarded it, they found out that they were boarded, they had these turtles and corals, giant clams. And of course, the Navy wisely pulled out. And it was as if to say, you know, we don't have to go to war over turtles and clams, you know, and over a piece of land that, you know, reduces in area when it's high tide.
Yes, sir.
So,
militarily, General, I mean, I know this is silly. This is probably a silly question. How do we stack up against China? Let's say if there were an armed confrontation.
I will talk only about the radars.
Yes, sir.
Because that was our concern. We want to have a total sky picture. And when you talk of air power, you do not talk only of the Air Force. You talk of the civilian component of aviation. That is why radars have a joint use between the military and the civilian, which is probably a rare thing compared to the other branches of service. The total sky picture that we need in the Philippines, that we proposed when we started the modernization program, was a total sky picture of 6 radars. The CAAP, the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines right now, is proposing 4. So even if you propose 4 and 6, you have 10. Even if you make it 60, it still does not compare. Because on the east side of China alone, when I visited the Chinese Armed Forces and they showed me their radars, they have hundreds of radars only on their east coast. Because of course, they have the Taiwan or Chinese Taipei issue, the cross straits issue. Yes. They have they're facing Korea and Japan and all the other possible issues that they could have on that side.
Yes,
That
yes.
is the number of radars. Now, you imagine how many aircraft they have.
Wow, wow.
So if you compare maybe aircraft of other countries with that of China, I was even joking them when they showed me their aircraft, and I said, these are the aircraft that you will send off first. Parang yung gera nyo noong unang
Yes,
panahon,
yes.
ipapaubos nyo muna itong mga first batch nyo. Pag naubos na yung missiles ng kalaban, ipapasok nyo na yung mga Su-27 sa mga F-4 nyo, which has the F-16 technology, and then that's the time you come in. You know, they were
Does the
laughing because-
Philippines have surveillance aircraft or the capability to monitor the area from the?
No, we
from
don't
the air?
have the radars now, but we have short-range radars, and that is one of the things that is being proposed in the modernization program, which we should have obtained in the first part of the Modernization Act, the initial modernization program, which was for 15 years. We should have that long-range patrol aircraft already, not only because of the threat to Spratly or to our territories, but because it can help in disaster and relief operations.
Yes, yes.
Makikita mo kaagad kung saan ang kailangan. Although it's always argued na napakahirap i-maintain yan eh, but you have to have it. That is an irony of a weapon or a system that you use peacetime or wartime. Whether you use it, you have to maintain it because you don't know when you're going to need it.
Yes, yes.
So with the long-range patrol aircraft, we also proposed, of course, the interceptors, the multi-role fighters, and the people I gathered then, I sent them to all places in the world where there are the fighters. Let them fly these fighters. Let them inspect the radars, because I did not believe the brochures that were being sent to me. It's like buying a car. All the brochures are shiny. They're all nice to look at. They are all impressive. But there is nothing that can compare with what the Air Force of a country or the armed forces of a country that is using that weapon system will tell you.
Yeah,
because
yes.
when military men talk to military men, it's very cordial, but it's very frank.
Yes.
And they will tell you the defect of the system. So if they say it's okay, you have at least an 80 or 70% chance of getting a weapon system that is okay, or that can meet the mission requirements that has been envisioned for that weapon system.
Yes, yes. And
So I sent them out. That was almost 15, 20 years ago, and some of them have retired, and the weapon system has not come.
what is the holdup, sir? How come?
I-
Obviously, there's a need, and this
yes.
Spratly issue has brought it up.
Well, we have seen that already a long time ago, and that is why, you know, some of my staff officers then, the smart guys in my staff, they coined this phrase na, you know, we have to get out of this school of thought that there is only a limited horizon. The horizon, they said, is not between the foxhole and the coconut tree. The foxhole is between the sea and the sky. That is the horizon. And, you know, I said, you be careful because the Army guys might get angry with you, you know. And many of them made studies. They came out with a good modernization program, and I'm proud of them. Many of them are now generals, and still it did not go.
Yes, sir.
We sold the bases with the hope that we can fund the modernization program, but nobody can say what happened to the money that was generated, say, in Fort Bonifacio.
The sale of the baselands, yes.
Sale of baselands that could have been used as the down payment already for a long-range patrol, or at least a surface attack
Yes.
aircraft which can reach out to Scarborough or the
Yes,
Spratly if it was needed.
Yes. Well, anyway, sir, what this tension in the South China Sea has really shown us is that what you and your team saw or foresaw 10, 15 years ago is really needed now, and
even
really
before
underscores
us,
the need for
and
this.
even before us, because we had
Yes.
a fighter unit, the 5th Fighter Wing, that who were flying the F-5s, and the F-5s are one of the most advanced fighters during their time. That's why we had the Blue Diamonds,
Yes,
and they were doing this already, patrolling the Scarborough areas, patrolling the Spratly areas, and as a matter of fact, Scarborough was their impact zone.
Yes, sir.
Yung parang target range nila yan eh.
Yes, sir. Sir,
And nobody was complaining then. Ngayon lang yan eh. Di ba?
Sir, hold that thought because we'll come back after a few short reminders. Guys, more of the Spratlys and AFP modernization when Philippines Uncut returns. Stay tuned.
We advise the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Good evening.
I'm a former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, and I will be interviewed by the son of a general who is himself a distinguished general in our armed forces.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, sir, in my introduction to you, I mentioned your credentials, and really, sir, stellar credentials. And aside from that, I failed to mention that you are chairman of the Apex Counterterrorism Task Force. And I will hold up something that we brought to the studio. And this is a very, very vital and important office in APEC. Can you tell us about this position, sir?
I was chairman of the APEC Counterterrorism Task Force representing the Philippines because I was made an ambassador.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Kunanan. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight's topic is geopolitics. You know, folks, in the last several weeks, tensions have been rising in the South China Sea as the Philippines and the People's Republic of China have been locked in a diplomatic and naval standoff over Scarborough or Panatag Shoal. Now, this issue is of national and regional geopolitical importance. So in this show tonight, we're going to have a frank discussion to enlighten all of you about the issues and the situation. And joining us now is a excellent resource person. In fact, we're very lucky to have him. He is a former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and possibly one of the smartest men to occupy the office. He is a brilliant tactician, analyst, and commander. And he is also a master's degree holder in mass communications from the University of Philippines, public administration from De La Salle University, an air transport course from the Asian Institute of Management, and PhD studies in advanced management techniques also. He is also the chairman of the board of several companies in the Philippines. It's my pleasure to welcome to Philippines Uncut, General Benjamin Defensor.
Thank you. Good evening sa mga televiewers natin. I am also lucky this evening because I'm a former general ambassador and sent to that body consisting of 21 countries for representing the Asia-Pacific region, the region that has the biggest trade in terms of revenues in the whole world. And I was sent there because the president believed that I could do a good job. So actually, it was my first foray in the foreign service, having come from the military service, and they said it could be related to your job because it's counterterrorism. And I said, maybe I'll make a go for it because after all, I have a lot of experience in counterterrorism. Somebody once said that you'll be very good in counterterrorism.